What's going on, guys? This is the Base on Balls podcast, the Week 11 edition, the Johnny Lee Memorial League. I am joined this week by Hendog and by Connor. Hendog, I'll start with you. You got the win last week, but how you doing?
Doing all right. Got back from my family vacation in Italy. Got back early last week, so finally getting back in the swing of things. Like you said, picked up a win. Proud about didn't score the points I'd like to, but as long as you build up the wins, especially in this tight playoff race, I can't be upset with that.
No, 100%. Wins are wins, and anytime you can get one, it's a big deal. And but we'll kick it now to Connor. Obviously, Connor didn't get the win, but still a promising season. I think could still be had for him and Amarillo. But Connor, how you doing?
Terrific. I am probably not in the playoff hunt, and I guess we'll get to that later, but I'm still pleased with how the Amarillo trajectory is going, and I think it's going to be a fun few weeks ahead.
No doubt about that. And obviously I'm doing pretty good, and we will very much touch on that. But let's just don't jump right into it with our breakdowns for this past week, the matchups in this past week. And we'll start with the biggest one, I think. It was me against John Height, and the Norfolk Tides took down the Hartford Yard Goats. The final score was 841 to 705. So here's the thing for this week. John Haight's got a really good team. I think that's evident by him dropping 464 points with his bats alone. That's just a really, really good performance. I think obviously what you could say about his team this past week was the starters kind of let him down. I mean, it's still like a 70 points out of Corbin Burns, though. Obviously, he's got great pitching. I don't think it's a long-term concern. And even still, scoring 705 points most weeks, that gets you a win. But as for me and my team kind of just went crazy this week. The past month or so, I've had pretty solid performances. Some weeks I got wins, some weeks I didn't. But fortunate to get a win this week. For me, the highlight, I think, was dropping over 400 points with both bats and arms each. And I will make one note real quick that I didn't have a single two-start starting pitcher. So that 404 points came from 12 individual starts, which I think that's pretty impressive. I'm not going to be tooting my own horn a whole lot. But I mean, yeah, this is the week that I needed to have that type of performance, and I got it. But Hendog, I'll kick it to you for this matchup.
No, yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a couple things to talk about. Obviously, the one being the most obvious being John Height losing. I know this has been touched on a couple of times in this podcast. Obviously, he still has a very good team. I'd still say probably the best team in the league, but the disparity between him and the rest of the league isn't as apparent as it was last year. There's a couple of factors into play there. I think, I just think his team getting a year older, like you said, his pitching staff, couple notable performances that kind of, maybe swung this game, although it was a 140-point loss. Didn't get a lot out of Max Fried, Framber Valdez. Those are some two big guys. But, I mean, for Paul, you really couldn't ask for a better week. Like you said, 400 points from both the bats and the arms. And actually, I didn't even know it was 12 individual starts. That, like you said, it's pretty impressive. Really just up and down the board, just amazing stuff. Will be interesting. This is something to follow along because, in a playoff format, if we're looking way out to the future, the inevitability of John Height isn't as apparent. And when you have, not even a down week for him standards, but someone else who could exceed his total, especially in terms of the pitching department, that could sway something in the other direction. Something positive about John's team before I send it over to Connor. Should be getting Garrett Cole back, reigning Cy Young winner, presumably his best pitcher, although him and Corbin Burns you can make the argument one way or the other, but going to get an elite arm back definitely will bolster that rotation that has had its struggles at points. But I mean, huge win for Paul, keeping him tight in this playoff race, giving John Height his second ever loss in this league.
Yeah, absolutely. Connor, let's kick it to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a showing that the Heights team isn't the number one clear team as discussed, I think, in previous week. Cody and Bry have been maybe the dominant names in the top tier conversation. And I think this week might prove that Paul should be in there. For the Tides, there's been some back and forth on is this the year or is it more of a 2025 team? 841 points, very clearly the number one scoring team, and beating someone who is undefeated until week 2 or 3 this year is a terrific showing. And there were a couple great individual performances, but it was a team effort. There were no major negatives from the pitchers or like super surprising awful spots. So I think it's a total complete performance. And while Heights definitely still got a caliber team, I'm very scared of what the Tides are going to do the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one matchup. One matchup can go any way. But I mean, that kind of leads us into our next matchup that we'll break down here. Potentially the upset of the entire year, I think we can say pretty safely. It was the Rochester Red Wings taking down the Rocky Mountain Vibes. The final score was 759 to 670. So Tita and I talked about this matchup last week, and I mean, I know we both picked Bry to win. I think we both picked Bry to win pretty handily. But it kind of just goes to show you that it's a little bit of a any given week situation. Bry's team had one win coming into this week, or not Bry. Dave's team had one win coming into this week. But he still dropped almost 300 with his arms and then 465 with the bats. I mean, that's an absolutely incredible performance. 95 points out of Carlos Correa, just absolutely insane. He had 17 hits in 1 week. Pretty impressive. We said I'll say the same things that we kind of said about John Height's team in the matchup before. Bry's got a really great team. It's very well balanced. It's not going to really, fall off, I don't think. Even still, 400 points from his bats. I mean, the 4 teams we've talked about so far have all scored at least 400 points with their bats. That's pretty crazy. Maybe the standard is being raised a little bit for elite teams and their bats. Maybe it's not in the 300s. Maybe now it's closer to 400, which that's still pretty a crazy thing, I think. But yeah, Bryce team's fine. You take the loss to unexpected teams. It happens. But just really shout out Dave because I feel like this has been coming for a few weeks where he's dropped pretty consistently high 500s to 600s and then just erupts this week with 759. I don't think Dave's team is that bad. I just think he's kind of been a little bit injured, I think, so far this year. Getting guys back. He's made some good, smart trades to compete. Whether that turns into a playoff run, I sort of doubt it. He's only got 2 wins now. But certainly something to build upon as we go into this coming off season. But Connor, I'll go to you first here.
I mean, shout out Dave is the total phrase for this, and his team kind of has the 2023 Homco feel of underperforming. The point spread is not that bad. He scored more than Homco, Smell, myself, Bracton. He's able to put up these upsets better than a lot of us have. Last year, he upset Cody. This year, he upset Bry. I think, and it's not like Bry had a bad performance, 670. I think he'll take that a decent amount, but 759 and outscoring Bry's pitching is almost impossible. So I think that is just A, baseball, but good luck, and B, I keep praising Dave's strategic pitching acquisitions and the timing of when to buy and sell them. And here I think it paid off in a major way. So is it maybe too big of a hole to come back for a playoff spot? Sure, but I love what I'm seeing, and if Correa stays hot and Jordan Montgomery heats up a little bit more now that he has more time in the season, this team could cause some damage.
Yeah, that's great recall. Recalling Dave beating Cody last year. Kind of a shock that no one saw coming. It's very similar to what happened with Dave and Bry this past week. But Hen, I'll let you have last word here.
No, yeah, obviously we talked. Connor mentioned the callback from last year, Dave upsetting Cody, but I mean, talking about this matchup, 465 bat points is ridiculous. We already mentioned Correa. I mean, he had more RBIs in this matchup than he did strikeouts, which is just unfathomable to think about. He actually doubled it. He had 9 RBIs, just 4 strikeouts, but got some other big performances. Jaime Candelario came in. Riley Green just adding to a great season, but I mean, it really came down to the pitching. I think for Bry, a lot of unexpected pitching performances, I'd say. -1 from Freddie Peralta, 2 from Tarek Skubal, -3 from Ben Lively, who's been kind of a nice under the radar pick guy from him. I know, Connor, you traded him too. Bry, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but some uncharacteristic pitching performances, and Dave's team just showed up to the moment. And obviously, another, the craziest upset we probably will see all year. Although, I mean, you could maybe even argue that Tita beating John, whenever it was, I think it was week 3, week 4, might have counted that because it was the first time John had lost in the league. But obviously, a big win for Dave. Like you said, a lot of interesting pieces on this team. I'm really curious, specifically with Carlos Correa, because he's really starting to heat up now. Doesn't really fit Dave's timeline, and for a team trying to compete, and shortstop's always a position where, you know, if you get a good shortstop, you want to keep him. So curious to see what his market will be like. I know Dave will definitely shop him before the deadline, but no, yeah, great stuff by Dave all around. Interesting to see how he kind of builds upon this, but and then for Bry, you really can't get mad at yourself. Like he said, 670 points. That's good for most weeks. I think he would have beaten every team except for Paul and John, and then Cody. So would have been at least half the league this last week. Can't be too upset at 670.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, you made a good point about Carlos Correa and absolutely not really fitting Dave's timelines. It's going to be interesting to see what he does. But we will move on to our next matchup. And this one is the Nashville Sounds taking down the Rocket City Trash Pandas. The final score was 587 to 510. It was Tita taking down Hamko. I mean, for this one, Tita really brought it with his bats. I feel like Tita brings it with his bats every single week. But he always tries to kind of piece together a little bit his arms, and his arms only went for 189 this week. I mean, that is the risk of what Tita builds and how Tita kind of operates. I mean, some weeks you're going to get, guys that will throw 30, 35 points. Some weeks you're going to get a guy that goes -11, like JP Sears went -11 in his 2 starts. It's not something that, I mean, JP Sears has been doing this year. So, I mean, he's been kind of up and down, I will say that. But obviously, you would hope to get a little bit more out of a guy like that. But then as for Hamko, again, like, it's tough, because he has good players. Michael Harris went on the IL this week. That's going to be a tough blow for him. But then shout out Andrew Vaughn. I think I said it maybe a couple weeks ago that I think he's on the verge of like a post hype breakout. He had 71 points this past week, 3 home runs. I do believe in Andrew Vaughn as a long term, at least maybe top 15 first baseman, maybe top 10. It's like somewhere probably in there is probably where he'll end up. But that's certainly a rosterable player. and definitely somebody that if Hamko's gonna sell, definitely I think somebody that he could get a decent package for. But I mean, yeah, it was a tough week for Hamko. It's been a tough season for Hamko. But it's not over. Can always try and get some wins here and there, but I would more so focus on that the trading some of those guys. But Hen, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, I mean, kind of piggybacking off you're saying with, in particular, Andrew Vaughn, I'll talk about in general. I mean, Andrew Vaughn, he's been a 4.5 point bad this season, but if you look at last 30-day split, he's a 6.3 point bad, almost 6.5 point per game bad. Like you said, that's something that, especially with some of these competing teams, definitely a piece that is very enticing. I know he's not on the greatest situations, but I think if the sample size warrants it, I think he's going to fetch at least something. But yeah, I mean, first focusing on Tita, obviously 400, 300, 398 points from the bats, nearly 400. Really got a lot of guys came to play. Lane Thomas, former Beach Dog, leading the way with 63 points. Christian Walker right behind him. But yeah, I mean, the pitching really didn't help him out a lot. Only 189 points. And 41 of them came from Craig Kimbrell in relief as well. So, about I don't know the math. Is that I think 20%, maybe even more than 20% of his points came from a singular reliever. Not a lot of inspiring starts. I think Paul, like you mentioned, it kind of comes with the nature of his team. A lot of these wheeling and dealings. When you're wheeling and dealing a lot of these arms, you're not really always getting the most consistent arms because the most consistent arms are A, kind of stuck to the top teams, and B, they're not getting moved unless they're getting moved for a haul or kind of a similar-ish level arm. But yeah, I mean, that's Urtita picking up a nice win, especially after myself getting a win and Paul getting a huge win. Need to keep those wins to stay, and Chad also winning as well. Need to keep winning to stay in the playoff race. Homco, kind of mentioned it, just really, besides for Andrew Vaughn and got Outboom starting to heat back up. Bats didn't really give him a whole lot, although Jaron Duran also game 61. I just saw that, but that's the story of that. So yeah, I mean, huge win for Tita Homco. Kind of more the same, I think, what we've been seeing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot maybe had to do with him getting negative 53 points from his pitching on Sunday. Obviously, that's going to have its impact, but we'll see. I mean, Connor, you take the last word here.
Three things. One, I think we have to point out one of our favorite things to do on the podcast is note when players start for both teams. One of the Poodles' personal favorites, Heather Megill, had one start for the Sounds and one start for the Pandas, 10 for the Sounds, 20 for Homco's team. The second I would say is that this is maybe slightly of a down week for Tita, minus 53. That needs some sort of record or trophy. But realistically, this is a pretty normal week for Nashville. And then the third is this is a very curious week for Homco's team. We're going to probably get more into some trades later, but Homco bought starting pitching when I think he's been showing himself as a seller going forward. Whether this is a change in strategy, moving for a late playoff push, I'm very interested to see how the Pandas change up this roster the last couple weeks, since normally Honka's the team stays more similar compared to like Hita, myself, some of the more wheeler dealers in the league.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point that, we kind of identified, us ourselves, maybe not Hamko as much, but we've identified him as a seller, and yet he goes out and buys a couple pitchers. So obviously, he runs his team how he sees it fit, and we'll see where it'll take him. But we'll move on to our next matchup. Features one of our co-hosts tonight, It was the Clearwater Beach Dogs taking down the Richmond Flying Squirrels. Final score was 565 to 413. Hennon, it was your matchup. I'll let you take the first word.
No, yeah. Obviously, like I mentioned at the top of the show, can't be too upset with a win in general, especially with basically everyone around me winning. But I can't say I'm too pleased with my team's performance. 565 really isn't cutting it. I feel like my team's been kind of on this trajectory the past couple of weeks. A lot of it kind of has to do with the bats, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, when I'm down, I feel like injuries have been hitting my team, getting hit by the injury bug a bit. But I mean, 295 this week, better than I think last week, but still not amazing. He even got outscored by Scott. Jay Martinez really came to play. Also got a nice week from John Carlo, but some of the other pieces, really giving me maybe substandard for a lot of the big time bats are really nothing from some of these other guys. The arms have been really the kind of the ones leading the way, at least in this kind of recent stretch for me. 270, not terrible, I would say, but obviously, I think for someone with higher playoff aspirations, the number should be higher, and it has been at points. But Shota Minaga came back with a nice start, 39. Grayson Rodriguez with a great start as well, 33, and Chris Sale once again dealing. But like I said, can't be too upset with the win, but the team's performance obviously leaves a little bit desired for. I'll shout out someone on Scott's team, Royce Lewis, who we always talk about how great he can be if he does play. Chipped in with an 84-point week. That left side of the Twins infield, absolutely raking. And then obviously CJ Abrams, another great performance, 63, leading the way for 316. But then Scott just pitching them down, only 97 points. But yeah, that's what I would say my team's performance is. Probably a little harder on myself than I should be, but obviously, looking at myself compared to the teams I'm trying to beat, obviously I still think there needs to be improvement there.
Yep. No, I definitely agree. It's wins are wins, I think, and that's kind of what you have to just keep your mind at. But Connor, I'll let you take the next word.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting how the Beach Dogs handle the next couple weeks. I completely agree that they've had some injuries, and hopefully that changes the second half of the year. The number that really sticks out to me is 97. That is the number of pitching points Scott's team has. There is more talent there, but to be a potential 7 seed or even looking towards next year, that number needs to be multiplied by 3. So I'm very curious to see what pitching move Scott makes, or if he tries to completely liquidate the proven starters he has and move around some prospected pick assets for next year.
Yeah, and I'll just touch real quick on, piggyback a little bit there. 97 points, and he had 12 starts. Typically, this year when we've seen under 100 from pitching, it's because they don't get the full 12 starts. But I don't think it's as much that as it is his bullpen. His bullpen, at least for this week, was pretty rough. I think negative total. It looks like -9 points total. That's just something that, like I've said it for a long, long time. Bullpen is what separates good teams from great teams. And I think that maybe I'm not going to be, the GM for Scott, but that might be where I'd look first. See if you can go get a bullpen arm from somebody, somebody that you at least like. Maybe is in a good situation. Maybe he's been underperforming. You can buy somebody cheap, type of thing. But or not, just whatever you want to do, basically. But as for you, Hen, you had a pretty good performance. Again, you kind of hit on it yourself. Under 300 from both the bats and the arms. Obviously, not the ideal situation, but like I said, like you said, like Connor said, wins are wins. And you never can get too upset when you do get that win. But we will move on now to our next matchup, and that will feature the other co-host on this podcast. It was the Portland Sea Dogs. They took down Connor's Amarillo Sod Poodles. The final score was 588 to 444 points. Connor, it was your matchup. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so this is the third of three matchups against the big dog teams of Height, Cody, and Jab. The first two matchups, I was pretty in it until Thursday, and then the wheels came off the weekend. This matchup was over by Tuesday. I had a couple really bad pitching performances, and while some of my individual assets I'm kind of happy with, this was a stark reminder that I'm definitely in asset collection mode and need to be looking ahead to next year more. And then Jab, like Hen, I don't think he's happy to get under 600 points. There's still an injury bug to an extent, but I'm very curious to see if there are going to be more depth acquisitions. I know that's not Jab's modus operandi for making a team, or what the trade deadline is going to look like there. Because again, this is a team that hasn't had too much roster turnover. Speaking of bullpens, I do want to point out that this roster has a ton of relievers of starting pitcher eligibility, and those add up. Denadiel Nunez had 37 points randomly. So I think that's definitely something the rest of the league should be scared about when facing the Sea Dogs.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll touch on this real quick, and then I'll hand it to Hen. But I do like what you said. You're doing a great job of it too with the asset collection. Just looking at the bullpen, Trevor Miguel for the Brewers has been really great while Devin Williams has been out. I'm very curious to see if you would flip him or if you'll keep him. Devin Williams has been good when he's healthy, but it seems like he's not very healthy for a full season. So there's definitely something there with Miguel. But overall, just under 300 with your bats. I think your team is fine. Is it a playoff team? It's not looking that way. But like you said, the last 3 weeks, your schedule's been pretty brutal. And we'll see if it'll open up. I think it does these next few weeks. But as for Jab, his team is really good. Aaron Nola going -20, just probably the worst start probably of the season for him. Not something you would expect week in, week out. 322 with the bats. He's got solid bats. Nothing really to say there. Bobby Witt Jr. has been a crazy player this year. He's probably leading MVP for the American League. So yeah, just another week. A little bit under, I think, what Jab is looking for in terms of scoring. You said it, Connor, that he's kind of that elite team. And I think he is. But, scoring 588 against a Cody or a John Height might not get it done. So I'm not sure what he would need to improve. Probably just having Aaron Nola be Aaron Nola would be a good start there. But yeah, so overall, not too bad. But Hen, I'll let you get the last word.
No, yeah. I think, kind of echoing what you two are saying. Obviously, this isn't what the point total Jab is expecting for, but he won, kind of keeping pace. I think now is he tied with Height and Bry? Yeah, so now they're all tied. 2-way tie for that second seed. Although with Cody leading the way, it's really kind of who's the division leader in the other division. So, but it's nice to at least keep pace with the rest of the top of the dogs. No pun intended on that one. But but yeah. Look, talking about your point about Aaron Nola, obviously he's a Phillies fan. He's been great this year, and very uncharacteristic start. If he even gets a 20-point start, Jab's looking at 628. That's a 40-point swing, and you're looking at much more favorably. So if you want to play the optics game there, definitely plays in his favor. But, still, good week from the bats, the arms, 266. I think it's a shade under, I think, Paul, you're saying maybe, a lot of teams were getting 400 this week. I still think for the most part, if you're hitting 300 with your arms and you have really good bats, I think you're fine. So just a straight under, and I think he's not. I think he'll be fine. And Connor, that point you're mentioning about the starter pitching eligibility, I think that's something that has really been kind of a difference maker, especially with the waiver limit cap, is trying to find these really good start or relievers who can play as starters. I know he's got a couple, like you said. Daniel Nunez at 37. Matt Strom has been one of the best, relievers in baseball with a .96 ERA. Getting him in the starting spots, kind of like not a Mason Miller cheat code, but good cheat code in of itself. But that's good for him. And then, Connor, I think like you mentioned, kind of staying the course, really in asset collection mode. Good solid form, especially from the bats, the arms. Especially the position you're in, they're kind of hit or miss at certain points. You might get a really good week, and then you might get Austin Gomber pitching -21, or Joey Estes getting -10. It happens. I wouldn't really get too mad over it.
Yeah, no, 100%. We'll move on now to our next matchup. It was the Oklahoma City 89ers taking down the El Paso Chihuahuas. Chad against Smell. Final score was 575 to 348. Obviously, Chad gets the win here, but I think the main storyline coming out of this week for Chad was the injuries. Kyle Harrison, Yamamoto, both hitting the IL. Hurston Waldrop hitting the IL. Yeah, I mean, obviously you get a win, especially when you're in such a close race for that 7 seed. Getting wins are massive for Chad, but it looks like the long-term outlook for his team might have taken a pretty decent hit this past week. Losing 3 pitchers that you kind of been counting on. Well, maybe not Waldrop as much because I think he just got called up, but definitely Yamamoto is going to be a big loss for Chad. But he does have good young pieces. We've said it. That hasn't changed. So we'll see maybe how he kind of adapts, reacts from that. As for Smell, I think we can probably safely say that the 2 or 3 weeks where we thought, oh, maybe Smell can turn it around, flip his team around, maybe make a playoff push. I think that's pretty well over. I think he's kind of realizing that as he's put Hunter Brown on the block. Maybe it trades a minute there. We'll see. 190 with his bats, 158 with his arms, 348's not a very good performance. Not going to beat pretty much anybody doing that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see now if Smell is truly taking the punt for this year. Which assets he'll move, what he'll get, what he'll build for towards next year. Connor, I'll let you take the next word.
I mean, yeah, I think I don't see Chad going on this massive Brian spree, but one of the main narratives as we continue on this year is that the 7 seed is going to likely come down to Tita or Chad. How do they perform week over week against each other? What moves they make to improve their positions? Tita scored 587 last week. Chad scored 575. In his good game message, Chad specifically said, I'm not happy I didn't hit 600. So I do think that this team does have the assets to rebuild, but I should say build up the major league roster, but I'm not entirely sure how far Chad is going to stretch to bolster the team and secure a playoff spot. For Smell, 348 points, not even close to the second lowest scoring team. I think this is a pretty clear indication that any playoff hopes are over, and Smell's done a phenomenal job building assets with all those first round picks and some stud prospects, but it's time for 2025 in El Paso.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Han, I'll let you get last word here.
No, yeah. It's very interesting because obviously, Chad's still in this race, but I remember going into the year, I think there was a lot of expectation for his team, and I think there have been players that delivered. But Paul, you kind of touched on it when you're talking about just the injury bug that he really suffered. I mean, this week, and now you're looking at going this year. There was obviously a lot of young, exciting pieces: Yamamoto, Kyle Harrison. A lot of these guys have been hitting IL for him. Yamamoto just hit the IL. Harrison's hit the IL for him. He lost Jung Ho Lee like very early on. Evan Carter has missed a good chunk of this season. Wyatt Langford's already missed like 25, 30 games of this season. So a lot of these guys he was expecting early on to deliver, have been hurt. Some are, out more long term. In the case of Langford, he just came back, and hopefully some of these other guys will get back healthy for Chad's sake. But I think that's really kind of maybe stalled him out a year because if let's say all these guys are healthy, everyone's playing up to maybe the expectations we saw. Maybe we can see him more buying, but I think he should be a seller. I my philosophy is, I don't know what the chances of him are backdooring in the 7th seed, but even still, I think with some of the assets you can get by kind of looking for 2025, I think that maybe outweighs it. I could be wrong there. I mean, Paul, you can speak to it personally that you kind of backdoored your way in the 7th seed last year and you end up winning a playoff game. So maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing for Chad, but I just think things really haven't gone his way. A lot of injuries played that, but obviously he getting that win still puts him in nice position. He's only a game behind Paul and Tita for the 6th and 7th seed respectively. Still a whole lot of season left. And then on your point for Smell, I think it is time for Smell to sell Ryman accidentally. The Hunter Brown thing will be interesting because if you remember, and I mean the narrative that was going on the early part of this season on this pod was kind of what's going on with Hunter Brown. He had really bad trade value. I know Cody shipped him to Bracton, I believe, then Bracton flipped him. Smell got him in addition to Graham Ashcraft and Sammy Basalo, who's one of the best hitting prospects in the league. Obviously, that, Paul, or one of the best hitting prospects in the minors. He got him for Bohm, Tyler Mayhill, and a third. Now he gets to flip Brown for something. I don't know exactly what that would be, but I assume it will be better than a kind of not even a main piece in a deal. So good asset management by Smell if he is able to kind of, take advantage of that. Really don't have a whole lot to say in terms of his performance this week. Zeke Tovar has been an absolute animal. Nearly a 6 point per game bat. Been a 7 point per game bat over the last month. Really starting to hit his stride. Really starting to find his groove, even though the Rockies may suck as a whole. And yeah, that's kind of my piece on this game.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on something that I wanted to touch on as well. That, with Hunter Brown, Smell got him for not a whole lot, but that's the kind of move that Smell was in position to make, where obviously we knew Hunter Brown was struggling this year, early in the year, but he's only 25, and obviously you can rebound from that and come back from that. And the last few starts, he's clearly shown that he's not, this some scrub pitcher that was overrated or anything. I don't know that he'll be like an ace or anything, but he's definitely a good pitcher, a worthwhile pitcher to own. But it's just a credit to Smell and his management. But we'll move on now to our final matchup to break down. It was the Bowling Green Hot Rods, and they took down Bismarck Larks. So it was Cody taking down Bracton. So for this one, Cody, obviously, great team. We know that. We've seen it. 462 from his bats, 303 with his arms. Just really solid performance. Maybe a little bit of a down week, actually, with his arms. Guys, I mean, like Mason Miller, as we've kind of said it, that he's just been a cheat code. He went -5 this week. Not something you would anticipate going forward. But then you have a Jared Jones with -2, a Mitch Keller with only 4. Walker Buehler only had 1 point from his start. So, I mean, 765 is a killer number, but it could have been even better. And I think Cody kind of is counting on that to happen in the coming weeks and months. As for Braxton, I mean, I do like his bats a good amount. Like 324 from his bats, and for the most part, they're all young. Like a Volpe, Jackson Churio, Colton Cowser, obviously Ellie. I do like Braxton's bats, but as we all know, the beast in this league is building up pitching, and I just don't think he's there. Like relying on guys like Patrick Sandoval. I'm sure he was a free agent pickup, but Ryan Nelson. I mean, Slade Ciccone has had a decent start or two here and there, but -13 for this week. Like, I'm not sure that, and I know that he's got pitching prospects like a Christian Scott, but I just feel like he should be sacrificing 1 or 2 of those bats to get at least a dependable arm, somebody that isn't a Chris Paddock. Like, no shade to Chris Paddock. Obviously, I own him for probably half of the season, but he's a guy that's just going to go for 37 or he's going to go for -5. And there's not a whole ton in between. And if you have that as like your 10th pitcher, that's fine. But obviously, Braxton's currently at least relying on him to be one of his top 5 pitchers, and that's where you run into problems, and that's how you score 132 points with your arms. But obviously, Braxton knows that he's got good bats, and obviously, I think he knows that his arms need to work, and we'll see kind of where that'll take him. But Hen, I'll kick it to you.
No, yeah. Well, one, the point about Chris Paddock is kind of moot now because he traded him yesterday. Yesterday, 2 days ago.
Oh,
Yeah, he
did he?
traded him 2 days ago he traded him and Zach Neto for Mason Wynn and Frankie Montas. So
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
right.
even like going from I think Montas has a higher ceiling, but obviously his floor is a lot lower. We're seeing it now. So, I mean, it's kind of adding to your point. And I mean, looking at kind of the pitching, obviously for Braxton, not a really whole lot to be, desired for. I mean, if you're looking at even double digit, point per game arms on his team, right now he's only got 2 in the majors or 3 in the majors, I guess. It's Cody Petit from the Yankees, Patrick Sandoval, and then Frankie Montas. He's rostering 5 guys or 6 guys right now who aren't even on major rosters. I mean, Christian Scott makes sense. Some Jose Budo, guess makes sense. I mean, young pitcher. Mets aren't completely horrible. We won't talk about the 2, free agencies rostering or the, Bryce Elder, I guess could still, I don't know. But he's wasting roster spots and you're talking about pitching where he really could use some extra arms. But obviously that's, Braxton's MO is not winning this year. Will be interesting to see how he does build this rotation next year, I'd say. So, I mean, honestly, unless you're getting a guy you really want to keep for this year and next year, you really want to trade the whole farm for someone or, give up a big asset. But yeah, and then Cody, kind of business as usual, 765, even with his, some kind of noticeable bad performances from his arms, still got 303. His bats still, easily over 400, 462. One player that actually stood out, kind of experiencing a little bit of a surge recently, Corbin Carroll, finding his groove, I'd say, 6.5 point bat the last 30 days, got himself 52 here. Nice little, doesn't really have the power, that he kind of had last year, but, obviously with his his stolen base, some of his stolen base numbers and his ability to walk, I guess it's helping him out a bit. But Cody, business as usual, and Braxton, I guess also business as usual. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And then Connor, you will have the last word on this one.
It's a top 3 scoring team versus a bottom 2 scoring team. I have no further commentary on what's been said or what I've said about the teams in previous weeks.
Yep, fair enough. And that will conclude the recap portion of the podcast, and we'll move on to now a little bit of open discussion. We talked about it off the top. It was my matchup against John Height. I think obviously we all agree and can agree that while John Height lost for just the second time in 2 years, I think we all agree that his team is still way up there. But there is a new number one by himself, and it's Cody. What are your guys' thoughts on Cody's team versus Height's team versus Bry versus because now it's kind of pretty clear because the non-Cody teams they're all 3-9-2, and then after that is your team Hen at 7-4. So now there's a 2-game gap between the top 4 and everybody else. Tina and I kind of broke it down last week in terms of how we ranked that top 4. But specifically here to maybe John Height and Cody, what are your guys, or Hen, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts between those two teams? You there, Hen?
Sorry, I was talking for a second and I was muted. My bad. But
You're good.
so there's 2 things we do need to touch about on terms of John Height's team. Mookie Betts going down. I think he broke his hand, and JT Realmuto with his abdominal strain. I forget. Hold on, I forget the injury. Right knee pain. Well, I'm not even close. I think it's someone else who had an abdominal strain. But when you obviously look at John Height's team, basically a lot of the same guys from last year. And I think what you're getting from his team for the most part. Obviously, Mookie Betts kind of hurts. No JT Realmuto, you know, hurts as well, especially because he's starting Jake Rogers in his catching spot. I think in terms of who has the better floor, or who, if you play, let's say you play Cody versus John Height 10 times, I think I like John Height more. His players just seem more consistent. Like, Shohei Ohtani's gonna always give you that. Is gonna give you a lot. Aaron Judge has been unreal. Feel like he's been consistent. Marcell Zuna's kind of similar that way. And Mookie Betts, when he's healthy, he's obviously great. But I feel like with Cody, a lot of his players do seem to be more like hit or miss. Now, obviously, when they hit, I think at his peak, they're probably better than John Height. But, we've documented Corbin Carroll struggles this season. Bo Bichette has been pretty bad for the most part. Luis Robert's been hurt. Now he's coming back. Jazz Chisholm's kind of always been a very hit or miss guy. Manny Machado really hasn't been as great this season. So when everyone's hitting on all cylinders in terms of the bats, I like John Hyde's bats more consistently. But if, Cody's bats, they all get clicking at the same time, they could outscore them. In terms of the arms, I think I'd also kind of agree the same way. I think a lot depends on how Garrett Cole comes back. But I mean, I think there's just a lot more stability from John Hyde's team. I could be wrong, but that's just the way I see it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. With Mookie Betts and JT Realmuto losing both of them in the same week. I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast. Various guests, various hosts about John Height's team and kind of how shallow it is. I mean, currently now he's rostering 5 prospects, and we've kind of said that injuries are the absolute Achilles heel for this team. And losing 2 players like that, 2 players that he's relied upon pretty heavily this year, I think that's going to have a pretty significant impact on John Haight's team. And that impact to me is that it takes him from being, like, in my mind at least, the unquestioned top team, and it kind of throws him back into the mix with the other 3 teams that are in that top 4. I think you could make a case that Cody's team is probably better right now. His record says that his team is better right now, only 1 loss versus John Haidt and the other 2 with 2. Um, and realistically, it's healthier right now. Now, in a month, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, what will the case be? Will Cody have more injuries and John Haidt will get healthier? I think that's a certain possibility. But I think seeding matters, and I think whoever does end up getting that 1 seed and that bye has a significant leg up on just the rest of the competition, because you go from needing to win 3 weeks to 2 weeks, you know? And I mean, I can speak to it myself that I was the 7 seed and Cody was the 2 seed last year. He just missed out on getting the 1 seed. Obviously, John Haidt went undefeated. But Cody's team lost to my team. And had he got that 1 seed, obviously a lot of would have had to happen for that to happen. But he would have avoided having to play me, and then he will only had to have won 2 games. So I do think it does matter, seeding, and I think it will be very interesting to see who ends up that 1 seed. But Connor, just wondering if you had any thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think John Haight's team has like 7 high-end injured pitchers. There is absolutely a scenario where especially Garrett Cole, comes back as a wild card and takes off. And I agree with Hen's point that with an older team, there's just even more consistency than Cody's 26 and 27-year-old studs. What this might come down to for me is how willing the hot rods will be to dip into that asset pool and make reinforcements. Height has 5 prospects, and he just traded 4 for Drew Thorpe, a changeup from the heavens, but perhaps a risky move nonetheless. Cody currently has 19 prospects, and half of them are pretty name brand ones. In previous weeks, Cody's made it clear that I don't know if he sees that many openings to where the team can improve. It's just a lot of studs that are underperforming at the moment. If he does make those moves, I think that he could jump Height for sure. For now, I think I lean Height to win a playoff matchup, but the pitching injuries and how they come back from it is the X factor for me.
Yeah, no, really solid points there, I think. And then the flip side of that matchup was my team. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about my team. I'll leave that to you guys more. But I will say for me, this past week is what I've been building towards for probably since week 2 of last year, when I infamously blew up my team and traded a Jose Ramirez for what I traded him for, and kind of tore my team down to rebuild it back up. I've been building my team specifically, maybe not to beat John Haidt, but to take down one of these top teams, and kind of assert myself as maybe not in that group, but not far off of it either. And I think I've done that, and I think I've done it pretty well. But Connor, I'll flip it back to you. What are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about my team at large going forward? Just a general commentary, I guess.
Well, I think in a previous week, T just mentioned that you might have the best asset collection, or if I had to come from the heavens and pick a random team, who would I do it? And I think that is spot on. Your team may not have the best win now group, but I think given the high end specs and still a decent crop, specs 19, if I remember right. I think there's definitely room to clearly enter that 4 win now echelon. Um, just you have one of my favorite pitching groups in the league, Logan Webb, George Kirby. I think these are names that once Garrett Cole or some of the other names go out, Corbin Burns hits free agency, who knows what he ends up doing. I think you have some guys that could clearly step up as those top 3 to 5 pitchers, and the bats are solid as well. So I don't know if the Tides are going to win the championship this year, but I think it's definitely in a terrific spot to compete against the top 4 and maybe have 2 wins in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I would certainly take that. 2 wins in the playoffs would be pretty nice. But Hen, I'll let you have last word, kind of just to piggyback on what Connor was saying, just a general commentary, I guess, on the Norfolk Tides. Are you there, Hen?
No, yeah. I mean, yes, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Obviously, you've done a very good job in the year and a half kind of rebuilding from that deal. Obviously, you have Gunnar Henderson, who I know you said Bobby Witt's probably MVP. I don't know. I think it's either him or Gunnar. I think you can still go either way. Might come down to the fact that the Orioles might be significantly better than the Royals. Well, the Royals are pushing their own way. But a lot of nice pieces here. A lot of them pretty young. I mean, Gunner's obviously the kind of the model for this, but you have some good veterans. You made some savvy moves. Really building up the pitching core, which is not that it's not that easy to do. You kind of you bring in Logan Webb, who's just kind of a rock. Um, Obviously, you have Taj Bradley, who's starting to now maybe figure it out a bit. Luis Hill kind of got him for free, and he's been doing wonders. We'll see with Garrett Cole coming back where his spot in the rotation lands, but even for what he had, gave you a nearly 30-point per game pitcher. Pretty impressive. Garrett Crochet really doing well for you as well. And then obviously George Kirby just been, just an absolute rock as well. So I think I'm curious to see what your kind of plan of attack for the deadline is. Like you said, you have a lot of, prospects to work with, but if you're really gunning on maybe winning this year, I don't know, maybe you move off one of those guys, but maybe you do want to hold on because of just the upside they do have. But obviously still time will tell. I think you have a very good team. And I think this year, more so than last year, once you're in the dance, you just got to be hot for 3 weeks. I mean, I guess if you're the number one seed, it's just 2 weeks. But if you're in the dance, you just got to really get hot for a couple of weeks. It's not like last year where there was a team that was kind of far and away better than everyone else. This team can get hot. We saw I mean, I think you've had a stretch of the last 3 weeks of dropping over 700 points. I could be wrong on that, but I feel like it's close to that value. But regardless, still a very good feat. And I think you have established yourself, maybe not in the 1 and 2, but definitely in that 3 to 5 range.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are right. I've been hovering at least that 700-point total the last month or so, I think. Obviously, that's my goal. I think that's probably about everybody's goal. But, just to see it come to fruition a little bit, obviously it makes me happy. But we'll move on here to our next topic. And it was obviously the second one we talked about at the top of the podcast. It was the big matchup, the big upset of the year. It was Dave taking down Bry. Well, obviously we'll get to Dave's team in just a minute, but I wanted to just kind of break down Bry's team here with you guys. Taking the loss that he took, scoring under 700 points. I think it's a little bit of a departure from what he's been. But just looking at his team, it's still really solid. And, obviously still young, too. All these dudes are, besides Sal Perez, all these guys are in their 20s. So, Bryce, at least for their bats. So, Bryce team's really good. Just looking at his team, Julio Rodriguez is a 5-point bat. And when you compare it to guys like Steven Kwan, Helio Ramos, I know Ramos hasn't been up as long, but he's still, got 137 at bats. It's still not a small sample size. It's the depth on this team is crazy. But in comparison to the other top two teams we've already talked about with Cody and John Haidt, Connor, I'll head to you first. Where do you kind of think this team slots in, not for just this season, but maybe long term between those two teams?
Well, for the current year, I feel like I had him in a top 2 or 3 to these first several weeks, but having a loss to Dave being the upset of the year does have some concerns with that. And compared to a Cody, a Jab, a Paul, I don't see as many premium prospects necessarily. The length is fine, but the quality isn't at the level of how some of the other teams have top 100 specs. So I think the consistency that the Vibes have shown is going to make for a fearsome playoff contender, but I think there are valid concerns for next year of what if Chad starts buying? What if I start buying? Scott was a 7 or 8 seed contender for preseason rankings. If that team includes, how does Bry's team stay the course? So I think right now he's the number 3 or 4 team, but I think he needs to exploit this win now window.
Yeah, I do agree. The prospect pool for him is maybe not as strong. I do like some of the names that he has, like a Zebby Matthews has been really good this year in the minors. Johnson Class A, when he came up, he wasn't the best, but I do think there is something there. Tyler Locklear has been pretty decent so far for his call up. So there is a couple good names, but I do agree overall. There's not a whole lot in that system. But Hen, I'll kick it to you. Just some general thoughts here about the Vibes.
So I think going into the year, I was maybe a little higher on Bry's team than others. I really loved the pitching staff going in. I think I still really do. I made the claim in the beginning of the year that I think that it was the best. I think I still agree with that. Maybe I'm still. He has a very talented pitching staff, and we talk about how pitching's king. You have Ranger Suarez, who number ranked second SP, would be number one, and run with excluding the Blanco Ronaldo. I can't say his name. The Blanco perfect game. Excuse me. Tarek Screwball's up there as well. Freddie Peralta just kind of consistent. Carl Ragans as well. Not even getting the best year from Pablo Lopez, still around an 18 point per game arm, and then Nick Lodolo as well. I think the bats have vastly improved from last year to this year. Rafael Devers still kicking it. Stephen Kwan has just hit another level, even with not superb individual batting talent. He's just hitting the ball so much that he's nearly 8 point per game. He's an 8 point per game bat. Helio Ramos was a huge pickup for him. Michael Garcia as well, and obviously made that trade for J-Rod. So I agree with you that I think he needs to kind of spend these assets. I think there are a couple players out there on some of these selling teams, and I think if he really wants to kind of pack a punch and kind of really make it known, he really needs to go out some of these guys. I think the one that kind of stands out. I mean, I don't want to give him a trade device. I think if there's ever a team that could use the services of Trey Turner or Carlos Correa, it's probably him. He has O'Neal Cruz. He's not bad as like maybe a utility or like a first depth shortstop right now. But if you're trying to win this year, you need it. I think you can upgrade there. I think you kind of need to get Nolan Jones out of the lineup. Although I'm looking at the tinkering, he probably could throw someone else in there who's on his bench right now. But yeah, I think he needs another bat or two to really solidify himself. I think his arms are very good, and he's always a shrewd enough owner to where he can manipulate, stream starts as well. But I really like his team. I think like I said, he has a lot of prospects to work with. I think he really needs to kind of spend some of those prospects to get another bat or two to really kind of solidify himself and put himself in that top two conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a thing that you should probably do and think about. But let's kick it over to the guy that won that matchup, and it was Dave. As you were talking about Bry's team, I've just been looking up and down Dave's team. There's a lot of talent on this team. I know I made the William Contreras deal with him, where he got Logan O'Hoppe, Kobe Mayo, and PCA. I like O'Hoppe as a catcher. I don't know that he's ever like a top 5 catcher, but certainly young and certainly a good contributor. But this team also has Bryce Harang, who's been really good this year, only 24. Riley Green, who's caught fire this year, finally becoming that stud that I think we all thought he would be. I mean, in his minors, Kobe Mayo, Marcelo Mayer, Cole Young, PCA, Chase DeLauder if he's ever healthy. I mean, he's got pretty good bats, and they're all pretty young. Pitching, I think, leaves a little bit more to be desired. But still, a Jordan Montgomery is there, a Bailey Ober, a Ryan Papayat still is there. Jack Flaherty has been really good this year. Ricky Tiedemann, AJ Smith-Shawver, Chase Petty, Caden Dana I like, Shane Baz if he ever can, get healthy and debut. I like Dave's team. I mean, I think there's a lot of good young talent on this team, which if you're in the bottom half of this league and you're kind of maybe throwing in the towel, maybe not after you beat a team like Bride, anything's possible. I do like this team though, and I like its future for sure. But Hannah, I'll head right back to you. What are your kind of thoughts here with this team?
A lot of interesting pieces, like you mentioned. I mean, we touched on the Carlos Correa. That seems like a very obvious kind of trade candidate. But there's a couple other guys who I think, for cheaper could be sought after. Starling Marte has had a very surprisingly very good season for the Mets. A little bit under an 800 OPS, really good, recent month or so. Someone, if it's not super expensive. And I think with Dave's team, if he's trying to kind of sell off, obviously you have the heavy hitters. We talked about him. We talked about Cray. I think Jack Flaherty is someone who, if he keeps this up, can definitely cost a pretty penny, especially 27 point per game arms don't grow on trees. Especially ones that are readily available. So definitely something that could be on the horizon. Bailey over to a lesser extent as well. Although I think he has maybe a little more longevity than Jack Flaherty, but definitely a good pitcher in my eyes. Jaime Candelario in like the batting sphere, someone else who can be sold. I think we're gonna look at Dave's team if he plays this right. We're gonna look at Dave's team at the end of the year and talk about a lot of very good young pieces. You've already touched on a couple of them. He still has Josh Young on his IL. I know he's not a prospect, but a third baseman with a lot of talent. If he can stay healthy, obviously that's the big key for him. Um, you Bryce Terang, obviously getting him has been huge if he can keep it up. Kobe May has been, just one of the best prospects in all of baseball as well. PCA obviously is coming up soon. So I think if he plays the cards right and sells off some guys, I don't think Dave's going to be competing next year, but you're going to look at his team. Um, doesn't have a lot of draft picks, but with the prospects he's working with, you could definitely see a formulation of a plan there. And there's going to be a lot of young talent over in Rochester.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single doubt about that. But Connor, if you had any quick thoughts here with Dave's team.
Honestly, I think that Dave could be a playoff team next year. Jack Flaherty, Ryan Papaya, Griffin Cannings definitely had a downer year, but if you go the injury list and the prospects, Jeffrey Springs, Michael Waka, Robbie Ray, Shane Boz, Kate Cavalli potentially. These are all big names that you could definitely see coming next year and making a big impact. So I am very curious if Dave can get on a hot streak to end this year. I think the next 3 weeks are against Jab, PETA, and some smell. But next year, I'm going to be definitely watching to see how he handles the off season and if he makes a run for it or continues to widen his prospect pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so Cody and I think it was 2 weeks ago now on our podcast, Cody kind of said that he could probably pick the 7 playoff teams then. And that was 2 weeks ago. So, right before the halfway point in the season. And it was the 7 teams that are currently the top 7 right now. And then there's bottom 7. And that was 2 weeks ago. And I think maybe that gap has widened since. There's 7 teams in this league that are averaging at least 7,300 points. And then the 8th best team is averaging 6,700 points. So there's a 600 point gap or so between the 7th scoring team and the 8th scoring team. I'm just so I'll kind of put the question out there. Are the playoffs, in your guys' opinion, already decided? What do you kind of think of that 7 team groupings, like both of them, the top and the bottom? Connor, I'll head to you first. What are your thoughts here?
So last year there was a 3-way discussion or race for the 6th and 7th seed between the Tide, the Arc, and Mel's Chihuahuas. And any surprises have seemed to evaporate. My team hit 0-3. Smells has gotten creamed the last couple weeks. Scott's team has looked a little bit rougher. Dave's record too low. The only variable I can think of is Chad going on a buying spree. And compared to Paul, he has more prospects than Paul, and PETA is currently all in to win. So if Chad decides I need this to be my year and start selling off the prospect and first round pick capital to bolster the pitching, get more healthy players, I could see a sneak into the 7 seed. It's only a game currently, but with the current roster trajectories, I do think the playoffs are very likely set as is.
Yeah, for sure. And Hen, what do you think about the gap between 7 and 8 here?
I agree with. I think the playoffs teams have been solidified, and I mean we talked about it when talking about his matchup. Chad lost a couple of big players this past week. He lost Yamamoto, who is his second best pitcher behind Paul Skeens. for, we won't see how. I guess Sonny Gray is in that conversation as well. But his second best pitcher for, at least a period, 15-day IL, that's at least 2 weeks. Kyle Harrison, very young pitcher as well. He's losing him for a couple of weeks as well, at bare minimum. Those are injuries that are kind of hard to bounce back from. And I think the talent gap, even, I know, Paul, you're technically the 7 seed, but for looking at points for, you're outscoring Tita. But so I'll just use Tita, and I think your team's better than Tita, so I'll use his as the team. I think the gap between Tita's team and Chad's team is pretty significant, and depending on what happens this week, Chad I know plays me, and I don't know who Tita plays. I'm trying to take a look. He plays Paul, so I mean, we'll see there. So I guess one of those teams will have to lose. I think all the teams are solidified, honestly. Chad could make a run. He's the only team that can make a run, in my opinion.
Right, yeah. So me playing Tita this week, I think will have pretty significant impact on this next question that I'll ask. But so kind of the last topic I wanted to dive into, I think we all kind of agree maybe that the 7 teams are set. But if there was one team not in the 7, a Chad, even, your team, Connor, Scott's team, maybe, Smells 4-7. He's only 2 games back. Which of the 4 of those teams, and Connor, I'll start with you. Which of those 4 teams do you think maybe not the motivation, but talent-wise on their team, between buying power, schedule, maybe if you have it in front of you, which of those 4 teams has at least the best chance to make a run for the playoffs?
Which 4 teams?
Your team, Scott's team, Chad's team, and Smell's team.
Oh, Chad's team's number 1. I think he just has the best spec capital, and he's proven more points. I would maybe go Scott second. I just think the hitting infrastructure is there. Third, probably me. I think my hitters are better than Smell, but my problem is going to be how to allocate assets to get a better pitching setup. And then 4 is I don't see Smell buying. I think he's going to try to replicate what Chad did last year and use his first round picks to get every Japanese pitcher and high end prospect possible. So I think Chad's the only one with a likely stretch to make the playoffs, but I think it will be fun to see how the other 3 teams will duke it out in the second half of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy answer here is probably Chad's team. But I do think that there is, and maybe I'm wrong if you don't even pick your team, I do think there is a chance that you could make a run, Connor. You have a ton of picks, 37 prospects. I mean, there's a lot I would say to work with here. I mean, you do have a lot of injuries, I would say that too, but I mean, you have a Randy Rosarena. I think he'll get hot at some point. I don't think he's this 4-point bat all of a sudden. I thought that when I traded him away. Joey Ortiz has been really good this year. I think he's a really good player. As long as Kelenick's playing, and he should be without Acuna in that lineup anymore, I think he'll play and be good. If you can get healthy play out of TJ Friedel, he's a good player. Keep Ryan Hayes, same thing. Like, you have good players already on your pro roster. And if you just package a few of those picks together, a few of those prospects together, you can build even better depth. To me, it's all about identifying players that you think maybe not long-term players, because you have plenty of those, I think. But maybe like a short-term guy that you think will win you one matchup, maybe a couple matchups, maybe even a month. Maybe a guy that'll get hot in August. And obviously, none of us are fortune tellers, but just kind of identifying that type of player to go for. Obviously easier said than done, and it's a lot about luck. I mean, I would say a player like Luis Heel, but obviously I didn't even expect what Luis Heel would be. And maybe he won't be. Maybe he gets kicked out of that rotation when Garrett Cole comes back and when everybody's healthy. I mean, it's certainly possible. But Hen, I'll leave you with the last word here. Kind of which of those four teams would you pick?
I mean, I think the obvious answer is Chad, but I'll go with something else and talk a little about someone else. I think Scott's team is probably the second most likely, in my opinion. Out of that little group, he has a lot of veterans on his team: Pete Alonso, Bryson Stott, Jorge Soler. He's got some young guys who have a lot of pop-off potential. I mean, CJ Abrams is a pop-off potential guy. He's just a very good young player. Francisco Alvarez is finally healthy again. Ryan Mountcastle has been like a rock this season. Has a lot of prospects to work with, a lot of with high pedigree. I'm not expecting him to move a guy like Adele Amador, but he has prospects in the fray. How many does he have? 26 minors, a couple of picks, especially in the 26 draft. He's got four in the first two rounds. His pitching isn't as bad as you would maybe think. I mean, just looking at his team, a lot of high teens pitchers, obviously not aces, but Chris Sanchez has been nice a nice back end rotation guy for the Phillies. Nestor Cortez has experienced a little bit of a revival. I know that was someone people were really low on, and I don't know exactly what Scott got for him, but definitely less than what he was going for probably the year or two prior. Brady Singer, solid as well. So he's got a lot of solid arms. Robert Gasser's a young guy he's on the IL, but so obviously you can't get him back this year, but I think he's got a lot of assets to work with, and he also has, I think, besides from Chad, the second best foundation to build upon. So I'll go with him as the non-Chad answer.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. Chad obviously has the talent, has the prospects. It's just, I think for him, it's a question of can he stay healthy, or really, obviously, I don't think he can stay healthy. It's can he get healthy now, since he's already lost a few of his guys. But that'll kind of wrap that part of it up, and we'll get on to our final segment, which is breaking down this coming week, week 12 in the Johnny Lee Memorial League. Let's see, where's a good place to start? Let's start, Connor. Let's start with your matchup with Bracton. It's Amarillo Sod Poodles. They'll take on the Bismarck Larks. Connor, it's your matchup. What do you think for this week?
If this conversation was 5 hours ago, I would have said I would win this in my sleep. But right now, Bracton's actually winning by one, and since I had two starting pitchers and a reliever go negative, so I'm still confident that I'm just going to win just because I'm always very active in streaming, trying to find the small pitching edge, etc. And I'm not sure if Bracton's doing that, but I do think that this is going to be maybe a close matchup. Hopefully, I can get some separation and get back to 550 points. But this is not the highlight of the week in the league.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It's probably not the highlight matchup of the week. I think this one does end up being pretty close. I think both of you guys will be around mid 500s. because of what you just said, I would agree 100%. That I think you have the managerial edge just slightly. So I'll take your team as well. But yeah, this might. I don't think it's a great matchup in terms of impact on the league, but I do think this will be one of the closer matchups for this week. But Hen, I'll let you have last word here.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Something to note, obviously, we still got a week to work with. Bracton's only slated for 8 starts this week. I kind of mentioned this when I was talking about his team in general, where he has one, two, three, four, five, 6 pitchers who aren't on major league rosters. They're either in the minors or free agents. And then he also has Spencer Torkelson, who is, in AAA right now in Toledo. So Bracton's struggling to get starts. I assume he'll hit the minimum at worst, but Connor, like you said, very savvy, someone who I think is maybe using his roster space a little more efficiently. Um, I think the fact that you already had 3 starts isn't going to be as much of a detriment because I don't think Bracton's going to hit the 12 starts. So I think that'll counterbalance itself. So I like your team more. I think you are the better manager as well. So I'll go with the Sod Poodles over the Larks.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. We'll move on to our next matchup. Hen, it's your matchup. It's the Clearwater Beach Dogs taking on the Oklahoma City 89ers. You're taking on Chad. Hen, it's your matchup. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, obviously I think my team has a bit of chip on their shoulders right now. Um on a little bit of a win streak, although it doesn't feel like it, but this is a big test for me. I think obviously it's not a big game just for myself. I know the Paul Tita matchups also rooting for myself because even if one of them loses, they'll still have that game cushion on Chad. I'm confident in my team. Just had Kikuchi and Pavetta go against each other, which isn't always the most ideal, but it is what it is. Um, Hopefully, getting J Ram back. He missed the weekend due to paternity leave. Won't have Kyle Tucker, but I'm confident that I think the talent on my team is better. I think the team will get just enough to go over the top. No discredit to Chad's team. I mean, only a 12-point game. He has had one extra start than I did, and he had John Grego for -22. So that really helped out, in terms of my efforts. So I think it'd be a close matchup. I would give myself the edge, although Chad. Well, I mean, we've seen this league; anyone can beat anyone. But I think Chad's team is definitely more than capable of going head to toe with my team. But I'm going to give myself the edge.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think this is definitely a close matchup. I think both of these matchups so far. I mean, I think a lot of matchups this week are going to be close. Just kind of a preview of a preview, but I do think I would also take your team, Hen. But again, this probably is both teams are right around 600, maybe a little higher than 600. Exactly for what you said. But for me, it's how many starts will Chad get this week? And how effective will they be, and how healthy can he stay? I think those are kind of the headlines for his team going into this matchup. But Connor, I'll let you take last word.
Yeah, I think Hen wins this almost more for the need to. And that sounds weird when Chad's in the 8th seed, but Hen's team has been on a win streak, but not in the fashion he would like. And I think the Beach Dogs would like to get back in that top 3 or 4 teams. This is a team that made the championship last year. Chad, I sure would love to make the playoff, but he has just not been the GM to make quick, I got to win this now moves. They're very calculated. So I think that Hen is going to pull out more stops to make sure he wins this. And I think the infrastructure for a win now team is just already there anyway. So I got this as a Beach Dogs win, but I could see this being with a 90 to 100 point matchup.
Yep, for sure. Definitely, I think it will be sub 100 point difference. We'll move on to the next matchup. It is my matchup. The Norfolk Tides taking on the Nashville Sounds. A few weeks ago, Tita and I played, and Tita got the better of me. I have not lost a matchup since. So here's the deal for this week for me. It shows 8 starts. I will have, knock on wood, I guess, a 9th start coming in the form of Bobby Miller, finally going to make his Norfolk Tides debut after I got him in that Julio Rodriguez trade with Bry a while back now. But still 9 starts, and I mean I'm going to try and look around free agency, trade, what have you, because this is a pretty important week, I think, for both of us, both me and Tita. The winner probably more solidifying themselves into the playoffs, and the loser, depending on what happens with your matchup, Hen with Chad, maybe a little bit more on shaky ground. I do think it's going to be really close. I do think I would take my team, but there's a lot of risk, I think, this week. Luis Hill plays the Orioles. I mean, there's a couple other starts, like Logan Webb takes on the Cubs. I know they won tonight, the Giants did, but there's definitely some risky matchups. And again, same thing as last week. They're all individual starts. There's no 2 starters I have once again this week. I mean, my pitching matchups kind of stink, like in terms of, I think I have like 5 going in one day and then like none for 3 days. So it's going to be a roller coaster. It's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. But Connor, I'll head to you next.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a close one, and that just tends to happen with such important matchups. I'm going to lean Paul because I think he just has an easier path to adding where needed. Pita is the number one GM in terms of finding the perfect matchup and having the correct team in the right moment. But Paul has 3 times the number of prospects Pita has and more picks. So if there's a situation on Thursday or Friday where Paul says, I need to win this, he has just more pieces that sellers would look for and would trade him those pieces to push Paul over the top, perhaps. So I do think this is going to be a 50-pointer, but I just, in between how he did against Height, and he is very high ceiling, let's say low floor compared to the top 3 or 4 teams. I do think the Tides have this.
Absolutely. And then Hen, I'll let you get last word here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's been a team that's been as consistent or as on fire as Paul has been these last 4 weeks, ever since he lost to Tita originally. Multiple 700-point performances. Obviously, took down John Height this week. I gotta go with the hot hand. The starts obviously are bit concerning. Only even he gets the 9, only getting 9. Tita will have 11. I assume he'll probably get a 12th just based on his kind of wheeling and dealing just mantra. So that is obviously something to be a bit concerned about, but I'm gonna go with just the hot team right now, and that's been Paul. Also, he's got Mr. June, who's playing very well. Hit 2 homers already today, 29 points. So I'm gonna go with the hot team, although never count out the Sounds.
Mr. June, by the way, is Kyle Schwarber for those who don't know. And yes, Mr. June, I love Mr. June. But we will move on to our next matchup. This one is the El Paso Chihuahuas taking on Richmond Flying Squirrels. It's Smell versus. Oh my God, I'm blanking so hard. Scott. Thank you. So yeah, Smell versus Scott. This one's going to be, I think, a little bit interesting. Just depending on what Smell is going to do with his team. If he does end up selling, I do think Scott wins it a little bit more handily than otherwise. But regardless, I think I'll lean towards Scott here. He's gotten off to a pretty strong start. He's over 100 points as of this recording Monday night. But Smell's not too far behind with 72 himself. So I would lean Scott because I think he's got the better players. You know, the Pete Alonso's, CJ Abrams that we'd already talked about with his team. So yeah, I would definitely lean Scott here. I think of the matchups we talked about so far, this one might have the potential to be the widest margin of victory. But Hen, I'll turn right back and kick it back to you. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with that same logic that you went. Scott says the better players. Looking at Smell starts, only has 5 slated. I'm going to see maybe that's just I haven't set the rest of my rotation. Okay, I see a Bailey Falter start. Okay, so at the start, he just hasn't kind of done his maneuvering yet. I guess he's holding on to Hunter Brown. So I do think this is a game. I mean, we already seen Smell and Scott kind of put up some nice point totals. I think Scott's 127. Smell's got 72. Got some nice pitching performances out of Reese Olson and Javier Saad as of the recording of this podcast. And Scott got a really good Chris Sanchez start. Like I said, I think I'm going to go with Scott. I just think I think Scott's got the better team, and I think Smell's also a little more committed to selling, especially with the Hunter Brown potentially being on the board. So I'll go with Scott. Although this could be a close game. Definitely, both teams will probably be around the 500 if I had to guess, but I'll give it to Scott.
And Connor, what are your thoughts?
I have nothing to add that you and Hen didn't already say.
So you'll take Scott?
I'll take Scott.
Okay. So yep, we'll move on to our next matchup. It's the Rochester Red Wings, and they are taking on the Portland Sea Dogs. It's Dave against Jab, and for this one, I mean it's both teams in the 80s as of this recording. I'm just not sure that Dave is going to get enough starts this week. Right now, scheduled for 10. If he can get to 12 somehow, some way, I think it's close. But I mean, it's tough to pick against Jab. You know, I think he's a really good team. He's got a good hot team. So I will take the Sea Dogs. But I wouldn't be surprised if Dave ends up around 600. And whenever a team's around 600, they're frisky, they're dangerous to win. I just don't think it'll happen for him this week. I mean, if he pulls off another upset after beating Bry, that'd be pretty remarkable, I think. I just don't know if it's going to happen. But Connor, I'll head to you next.
So, how many times on this podcast have we said, oh, yeah, this rebuilding team kept it a close matchup with a prize fighter until Thursday, and then it went to heck over the weekend? I think we're going to figure out how this matchup goes tomorrow. Jab has Bryce Miller, Rodri Munoz, Aaron Nola, and Tanner Houck pitching on the same day. If that foursome and the offense score 200 points, this is a victory for Jab. If that pitching goes sideways, I could see Dave getting emboldened and trying to go for it. So I do think that Jab is going to pull this off just based off previous record, but I could see a scenario where this one gets wild.
Yeah, I think that's possible. But go ahead, Hen.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You go.
No, that's all. I was. This matchup does have that potential to get a little bit crazy, but I'll let you finish it off.
Yeah, definitely a little bit crazy. One thing I will keep note of, so Dave has 9 starts projected. He has someone on the bench, but 7 of them are expected. Well, he has 6 slated right now on Friday, with a 7th potentially. Which I don't know if I've ever seen that before. I mean, you can comment. You've been in the league longer. A 7 start day on one day, but um, so he will get at least 11 if he slots in Bailey over against the Athletics, which he should absolutely do. But so I don't know if it'll probably be over by Friday, if anything, because Dave will have basically like 80% of his starts going on that one singular day. Um, although I will go Jab, better team. I think his team's a little motivated, although these players have no actual concrete idea of us actually owning them. I think the fact that, he had a sub 600 week, team's going to be determined to kind of come out of the gate with a fire performance. But Dave's already keeping up day one. We'll see how this continues into the weekend.
Yeah, I think Dave has the same problem that I have, where a bunch of his starters are on the same cycle. But we will move on to our next matchup. It is the Rocket City Trash Pandas taking on the Hartford Yard Goats. It's Hamko against John Height. John Height looking for a little bit of revenge, I think, this week. Yeah, I mean, I think John Height's going to win pretty handily. I mean, Hamko, not sure exactly if he's trying to buy still, if he's still holding out hope. Slim hope probably at this point for a playoff spot. I just don't see it happening for him this week, and I think John Height's pretty determined to get things turned around, even without having Mookie and without having Real Muto. I do think the Yard Goats win this pretty handily. Hen, I'll turn it back to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Hamko's probably going to be the victim of a John Height 800, 700 point week. I don't think I have much to add. Will be interesting to see how John Height kind of maneuvers in a full week without Mookie Betts and JT Realmuto. Well, JT Realmuto, yeah, without the two of them. I know he's been streaming catchers and he's got another outfielder to slot in. Obviously, not as good as Mookie Betts, but that's probably the big thing I'm looking out for. And then obviously, Garrett Cole is expected to make his first start back this Wednesday against the Orioles. So those are probably the two things I'm looking out for in this matchup.
That's true. Garrett Cole is coming back this week against the Orioles. Should be an interesting matchup. But Connor, I'll leave you with last word.
I'm not sure I'm looking out for anything. It's awesome that Hamko is up 10 points on Monday night when Height has used a start, but I just don't see where the comeback is here. Goats by 200.
Yep. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, that's probably the case, I think, here. We will head now to our final matchup preview for this week, and probably the matchup of the week. It's the Rocky Mountain Vibes taking on the Bowling Green Hot Rods. It's Bry versus Cody. Matchup of two of the top teams in the league, maybe the top two teams in the league at this point. This to me has barn burner potential, where both teams are hovering around 750, 800 points. It's a really tough call. Neither team has had a starter pitch yet. Yeah, this it's really tough to call. I'll say this. I lean towards Cody, but I very much could see Bry doing what he has to do to pull this out. Yeah, man, he's got Pablo Lopez on a 2-start week. Bry does. I'll lean Cody. That's my final answer. Is I'll lean Cody, but it would not surprise me if this one going either way. Connor, I'll let you try and pick this one.
I find it poetic that you consider this a barn burner. The first image that comes to mind seeing this matchup is the legendary lightsaber duel over Mustafar between Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is just going to be ridiculous. I do think that Cody has the better infrastructure, I guess, but his team has struggled, and these teams are kind of similar. Great pitching is their highlight compared to the other big dogs. High end first and second baseman, awful shortstops. Let's be honest. But other than that, I will lean Cody as well, but I could see where Bry pulls some levers and maybe goes above to win this specific matchup in a way that Cody wouldn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could see that. Go ahead, Hen. Sorry, Hen, you're up.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna go with Bry. Like I said, I agree with you too that I think this is the game where it's basically a coin flip. No starts yet. Literally a 2-point difference through the first day. I think it's with the point Connor was saying that this Cody seems maybe a little more susceptible to maybe having a bad week, and I'm not saying his bats will, or even at all. I'm just saying the potential's there from the beginning. I had Bry ahead of Cody. I think I'll kind of stick to my guns on this one, but like I said, this could go either way. This could potentially go to This probably will go to Sunday. I'm going to give the slight edge to Bry. Wouldn't be shocked if Cody wins this. Obviously, I mean he is the best team in the league record wise, but I'm going to give the slight edge to Bry.
Yeah, definitely. The matchup I think for the league to watch. We'll all have our eyes on it. But that will conclude the preview portion of the podcast, and now I'll open up to you guys for any kind of final comments. Any last opinions on maybe things we didn't cover. Hen, I'll let you have the first word here. Just anything lasting, anything you're looking forward to. Just kind of you have the floor.
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot. Crazy how fast this season has flown by. I mean, we're already halfway over. We're entering week 12. I'm not sure exactly how far away we are from the deadline. I think it's about a month and a half, maybe. But season has flown by. Really, big fan of the parity we've been seeing. I mean, we just saw John Hyde lose again, and we saw Bry lose to Dave. A 9-win team lose to a 1-win team. Big fan of the parity. I think it's a lot more balanced than what we saw last year. I think this final stretch is really going to be exciting for the league. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of enter the dog days of summer in this final heading into the second half of this league.
For sure, we are entering those dog days. This of summer, they're certainly coming, and the season has certainly flown by. But Connor, I'll let you have the floor here. Anything on your mind? Anything you want to talk about? The floor is yours.
Yeah, so as I agree that the league's in a great spot for at least future parity. We think the playoff spots are pretty well decided, but there can be surprises. That's just baseball. A team that is currently having a bad record probably has the assets or the wherewithal to make some trades and maybe sneak up from behind on the current competitors. And the other thing is, last week wasn't very close matchups. I think this one's going to be a really fun one. We got two high competitors in Bry versus Cody. We got a battle for the 6 and 7 seed, and we've got a couple rebuild their matchups that should be fun to watch. So I think this week is just going to be action packed, and I hope everyone listening will join us on Sunday as well to recap it.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I'm totally looking forward to next week breaking these matchups down, because I do think there's going to be some ones that come down to Sunday, which is always fun. It's always fun to kind of, be looking intently into not just your own matchup, but everybody's matchups. See where people are going, see how people are moving, this and that. I will say my matchup with Tita, uh, I'm looking forward to it. I'm also not looking forward to it. I mean, I want to avoid the hangover week, because Tita is certainly not a team that you can afford to have a hangover against. But we'll see. It's going to be interesting. As always, it's always fun to break this down, to do it for you guys, do it with you two. Thanks to Connor, thanks to Hendog for riding with me this week. And good luck to everybody this coming week, and we'll break it all down again next week. But until then, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you later.